So our gospel reading this morning begins like this. This is Mark 10:35. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to Jesus and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And Jesus said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory." Oh, James and John. What do we do with you? Really? Really? That's what you decide to ask? I mean, this is kind of an egregious situation. Peter, by the way, is usually the boneheaded disciple. But here we have James and John, the sons of Zebedee, acting in what seems to be pretty obvious error. Frankly, at first read, I have some trouble taking this passage too seriously. It's kind of like watching maybe an episode of a child's television special. The lesson feels condescendingly obvious. I mean, we can tell from the first moment they draw breath that they're in trouble. We want you to do whatever we ask, they ask. Things are going to go pretty poorly. The other disciples, by the way, catch wind of their question, and they're upset too. Mark's gospel does not beat around the bush. And maybe Matthew and Luke have felt a bit the way I do when they were writing their gospels. You see, they both tell the story a little differently. In Luke, there is just a vague reference to the disciples arguing about their place in the kingdom. That's all we know. And in Matthew, it's actually the mother of James and John who asks Jesus the question. Matthew reads like this: "Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came up to Jesus with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked him for something. And he said to her, 'What do you want?' She said to him, 'Command that these two sons of mine may sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your kingdom.'" The error is still fairly obvious, but maybe it's a bit more sympathetic. We know we're not supposed to ask too much for ourselves, but maybe for our children? But whether it's James and John asking or their mother, even when the lesson feels a bit obvious, when we're honest with ourselves, we have to admit, we are not immune to the temptations of ambition. We too rather hope for a seat at the table. We too rather hope that our children receive the best of the best. This whole section of Mark, these passages we've been reading over the past few weeks, have brought me back multiple times to a blog post that I read recently. The post is from a blog called Sacred Ground, Sticky Floors by Jamie Amarin. The title of the post caught my eye because it rather reminded me of a mantra from my own upbringing. My parents would often say, "You're not special." It's a saying that I joke my parents told my sisters and I frequently, but I've learned many people don't find it particularly funny. And some are usually a little disturbed that my parents would be so cruel. As it would happen, my father is actually here this morning, so you can ask him directly whether or not he thinks his children are special, or whether his grandchildren are special for that matter. But this post was titled, "An Open Letter to My Children, You're Not That Great." Amarin writes about attending her daughter's dance recital. She says, "In the row ahead of me, a family has taken hot pink duct tape and marked off 22 seats. We were specifically told not to do this at the informational meeting." Amarin goes on to describe a full-page ad taken out for a 5-year-old named Kylie, the numerous balloons and camera equipment that are now blocking everyone's view, the 22 matching t-shirts especially made with Kylie's name and slogans for this recital, as well as the full meal of McDonald's that has been brought in for this entire clan to share, despite the clear signage asking that no food or drink be brought into the auditorium. Witnessing this fiasco in front of her, Amarin begins to compose a note in her head. "My dear American children, you aren't above the rules. and you aren't that great. I am not sorry if you felt less than your peers because I forgot to turn in the form for you to be highlighted in a program. As much as it hurts me, feel less than. Esteem not yourself. Feel lonely. Feel unworthy. Feel unaccomplished. Feel small. Feel lost. Feel broken. Feel least. For if you believe you are greater than, your Father and I have failed miserably. Among the broken, you will find Christ. My prayer for you is that you see him everywhere. If you are never uncomfortable, weary, left out, and unpraised, how will you recognize the desolate? And if you are never desolate, how will you recognize how much you need a Savior? Taken out of context, these words could sound a bit cruel. Indeed, Ameren received an onslaught of hate mail after this blog made the rounds a few weeks ago. But it is clear in her writing, within this post itself and throughout her blog, that she deeply loves her children. I first was reminded of this post when we were talking about Jesus' response to the rich young ruler who we encountered last week. Jesus looks on him and loves him, the text says. Jesus' response comes first and foremost from that place of love. In that passage and in this one, Jesus' words are the ones Ameren echoes throughout her post. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. To James and John's request, to the request put forward by their mother, Jesus commands service. He reverses the definition of power and glory and ambition. In the dance recital of the kingdom, the back row will be front, and the front row will be back. Of course, Kylie's entourage is taken to its comic extreme. It would be hard not to judge such a circus, forgive us. John Calvin may think of this story rather as he thought of the narrative of James and John, as he describes it, a bright mirror of human vanity. Yet in order to look into the mirror and see our own reflection looking back, something Mark surely would want us to do, it may help to explore another layer of the text. Because you see, James and John's question does not come out of nowhere. It is interesting that our lectionary passage begins where it does. We miss the context of this request. The verses preceding the story tell us a little bit about what's been going on. The disciples are on their road, heading to Jerusalem, and Mark describes this. He says, "Those who followed were afraid." And no wonder. Twice now, Jesus has foretold his future. A third time here, he describes this future. In Mark 33, he says, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death. Then they will hand him over to the Gentiles. They will mock him and spit upon him and flog him and kill him. And after 3 days, he will rise again." The disciples may be over and over dense about what is happening, but the fear among Jesus' followers has begun to be palpable. It is directly on the heels of this third reminder that Jesus will be mocked and killed that James and John find themselves grasping at straws. The future is bleak. It is out of their control. The costs will be high. Can Jesus perhaps give them some guarantee, some security, something they can count on in the end? In this sense, James and John's question comes less out of extreme vanity and more out of extreme insecurity, perhaps the other side of the same coin. They are afraid. They've given up everything to follow Jesus. Can they at least count on some kind of dividends? Or if you prefer Matthew's version, you can imagine a mother's dilemma. My sons have chosen to throw in their lot with this man who spells his own doom. How can I protect them? What choices do I have left? If we can cut James and John and their mother a little slack, it makes you wonder, what is it exactly that Kylie's family is so afraid of? And when we hold up that mirror, what is it that we are afraid of? We're afraid and we seek insurance. The world is tough. We want to be in control of what we can be. We get ambitious because if we have a guaranteed spot at the table, then we are all the more likely to ensure our needs are met when the time comes. We want our children to be successful because we want them to be safe and happy. The world is scary and out of control, and we want to protect our borders and our futures. We want to be reminded that there will be seats saved for us, preferably in the front row or at the right and the left. And Jesus wonders, do you know what you are asking? Meanwhile, in our Old Testament passage, another character has been asking his own questions. And of course, Job is a much more sympathetic character. He is really, besides Jesus, maybe the most sympathetic character in the Bible. He has done no wrong. He is good and loving and faithful, and his world has been taken away from him. His wife and his children have died. He has lost everything that mattered. Chapter after chapter of Job has been filled with theories and explanations, but really, up until now, the heart of Job has been in this one long why. Pastor Thomas Edward Frank describes this why. The question is much more important than any answer, Frank says. The question is a cry of pain, a slash of paint across a blank canvas that offers no discernible image of what is going on here. A slash of paint across a blank canvas. Why? Seeking the why is the natural human attempt to make sense of a nonsensical world. If there is a why, then maybe I can avoid this happening again. Maybe I can be safe again. If there is a why, then maybe I can grab onto some semblance of control, of predictability. But as Frank says, if asking why is some feeble human attempt to get control of life and bring it to sense and better management, God's response gives humanity even less sense of control than before. After 37 chapters, God finally appears out of the whirlwind, and God does not answer Job's question, though nor does God scold Job for asking. To Job's great why, God offers 60 rhetorical poems. God describes the stars and heaven, the ostrich and the lion, the river and the lotus tree. God asks, is it by your wisdom that the hawk soars and spreads its wings toward the south? Is it at your command that the eagle mounts up and makes its nest on high? To Job's very specific and very justifiable why, God offers grandiose words of question and creation. As Patrick Wilson says, God acts as a tour guide of wonder. To John and James's very specific, if less justifiable, request for control, Jesus offers his own questions. You do not know what you are asking, he says. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink? Or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? At first blush, God and Jesus here offer little comfort. Being told you're not that great stings. We so want to be special. But if we are so great, if we are so in control, where does that leave us? We grasp at what we can, we raise our walls and climb our ladders, and pamper our children that they may not know the deep anxiety we feel ourselves. Because if we are in charge of our own fates, our own security, and our own salvation, then there's always more to be done. There's always another neighbor to be a little bit better than, always another country building up its armaments or improving its math scores, another health scare around the corner to be avoided, or another way to be a little bit thinner, a little bit better. Our mistakes weigh heavy, and our systems must be strengthened. We are scared and hurt and tired, and God describes a world so much bigger than that. And Jesus describes a world so topsy-turvy that the first will be last, and the last will be first. And thank God he does. Worshiping a servant God means taking up a path that is in itself scary, one where giving is more powerful than receiving, one where we are called to be, as Amron puts it, uncomfortable, weary, left out, and unpraised. At Jesus' right and left hand, after all, will be two common criminals dying with him on Calvary. But worshiping our God also means taking up the path of a God who chose not only to create the canyons and the skies and the rivers, but also chose to come in the form of a servant for all. Jesus asks if James and John can drink the cup that he drinks. Preacher Charles L. Campbell describes Jesus' take on what they are saying. He says, "Sometimes these words are read as a threat or a warning from Jesus. James and John, you too will be crucified." However, in the larger context of the story, Jesus' words may also be read as an extraordinary promise. You will not always be driven by your fears and your need for security. Rather, you will be empowered to take up your cross and follow me. You will be faithful disciples even to the end. As Campbell says, we need not always live in fear. We need not continually seek our own security. Rather, we have Jesus' promise that we can and will live as faithful disciples as we seek to follow him. Whatever we may be asking, our servant God offers an extraordinary promise. We're not that great, but thank God, we follow the one who chose to be least of these and yet is greatest of all. Amen.